And so one thing we, in a sense, wanted to start with, or try and infuse through the conversation, was try to reflect on what has happened since a year ago in this particular area, the kind of that intersection of AI and blockchain, should we call it that? And I wanted to start with kind of my perspective, which is that that in some senses there is a heist going on in the shape of the kind of both existing reorganization and impending reorganization of OpenAI as it seeks to go and raise 5-10 billion for the next phase of its kind of its rollout. We're seeing something that was designed to be owned by the community and to therefore be protected from too much bias, being made purely for profit because it's, at least in the short term, it's quite hard to raise that kind of money in order to build out these AI systems. And so given that, and given that we were discussing this case just before now, there was a Stanford Google use case of a simulated world called Smallville, where you get they used OpenAI chatbots interacting in a quite complex agent-to-agent fashion, and they end up actually having a party for Valentine's Day and dating each other and exhibiting all sorts of quite complex behaviors. That's just an example of how complex and sophisticated this is becoming and how fast. So we need a lot of money, and we need to understand what's happening in these complex systems. And so we're here to talk about why that could well be achieved by the intersection between these two worlds, and to look at the question of how that might be achieved in terms of providing compute power, CPUs, GPUs, XPUs that are going to be coming down the pike, in assembling the data that is used to pre-train, train, augment these models, in actually finding ways to derive economic benefit for a broader set of people who contribute to these models, and then also perhaps ways in which we can create a low-friction economy between these agents as well. So with recommendations, reputation, and payments. So those are kind of the topics. So before we thrash through those extremely fast, I'd like to turn to the panel to introduce themselves. And I didn't introduce myself because I got interrupted so many times. But I'm managing partner of Fabric. I'm also on the council at NEAR to declare my affiliations. Jamie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, Jamie Burke, founder and chairman of Outlier Ventures. We're the world's leading Web3 accelerator. We're celebrating our decade in Web3 this year. There's a lot of echo there. You getting that too? Right, well, is what it is. And actually, we've been investing at the intersection of crypto and AI since about 2017. We published a paper called The Convergence Thesis back then. We're about to publish something called the Post-Web, which is looking at the impact of the agentic web on the internet. And we've had a number of investments in this space. Probably the most well-known one is Fetch.ai and its merger with Ocean Protocol and Singularity Net into artificial superintelligence.
Great to be here. I'm Jake Brookman. I'm the founder and CEO of Coin Fund, which is a crypto-focused investing firm based in New York. And our mission is to champion the leaders of the new internet. And we've been paying very close attention to the intersection of AI and Web3. We made our first investment there in WorldCoin in early 2021. We have a number of other companies in our portfolio, including Jensen, Giza Tech, Bagel, and others in the portfolio and following the space very closely. So excited to talk a little bit more about it.
Hi, my name is Terrence Kwok. I'm the founder and CEO of Humanity Protocol. We're building an identity-focused blockchain where the very first thing that we're focused on is what we call proof of humanity. So a little bit similar to WorldCoin in the sense that we're using biometrics for proving that a person is really a person, and we think that's going to be more important in as AI proliferates. But going beyond that, what we want to do is actually create a token economy around verifiable credentials so that we can put different human attributes onto the blockchain. So, yeah.
Hello, I'm Hugo, co-founder of Flare. Flare's a layer 1 EVM blockchain with enshrined data protocols, where the data protocols are secured at the chain level.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so sort of in some kind of kumbaya philosophical sense, we can agree that we want to maybe move things in an open direction, which is kind of what the intersection is about. Can you hear me? I think it'd be interesting to explore, though, how there can be technically superior solutions offered by that intersection, and even better than that, hopefully things that deliver better economics, short, medium, and long term, to the participants in these open, decentralized, AI networks. So, who would like to get going on that debate? I think Jamie, we can always rely upon in any of those 4 areas: compute, data, models, payment.
Yeah. Well, I think just to speak more generally, the reality is how we're all experiencing the kind of boom that is AI now is through these large language models that have effectively been trained on the open web. And so a lot of that benefit's kind of already been had. And so the real value is in providing context to both the LLM and other kind of models. And often the context is in the long tail. It's with individual users, it's with different enterprise that have these data sets, proprietary data sets. And ultimately, it requires collaboration. And so you need incentive design to figure out how you're going to make that happen. And so the kind of meta question is, how do we get to superintelligence? Is it going to be through some kind of monolithic organization that is coordinating capital, financial capital, and human capital, and kind of capturing or acquiring data? And it's going to deliver this monolithic, singular, brilliant AI that's a specialist on everything, a super specialist on everything? Or is it more likely that we're going to somehow find a way to coordinate the long tail of everybody else to open up shared data, train models, and then provide context to those models so they can be more relevant, more personalized, and not hallucinate? And so, of course, whilst it might end up being some kind of hybrid, the reality is it's the collaborative AI piece that I think crypto speaks to really well. Because what responds really well to logic isn't actually people or organizations, it's agents. And so if we can look at agentic networks as both coordinating and kind of playing these incentive games to develop, train, customize, personalize the experience of superintelligence, then I think we get there through Web3. And so how do we coordinate trillions of dollars of resources, which is what Sam Altman wants to raise into a single company? Or is it more likely that a Bitcoin-like, Ethereum-like set of protocols coordinate that in a trustless way? And so I'm betting on the latter. I think it's going to be the more likely way we get to superintelligence, but also it's the more likely way that we get the experience of superintelligence as an end user, because I need a paradigm where I can trust the AI to share my innermost secrets, needs, desires, intents.
So, I mean, the contentious point when we're talking about the compute side of things is, can we actually deliver something that is cheaper, often is the word used, than the fully scaled AWS or Google Cloud kind of platform? So, Jake, what's your thoughts on that?
So I know that in Web3, we often make that case, especially with, decentralized networks for things like compute and storage. And I think actually the reality of kind of expensive high-end compute is a little bit overblown, because if you think about it, well, what I'm saying is I think compute is actually going to be a lot cheaper in a few years than it is today, right? Because the market is responding to this bottleneck in demand for compute. And optimizations are happening in AI where, we're starting to be able to, if not do, then at least think about doing, for example, decentralized training on more commodity hardware. And so I actually, in summary, don't think that having a cheaper compute network is the dimension upon which these networks will really succeed and compete. I very much think that that dimension is openness. And I think everyone basically in the world has an interest in having the process that produces AI models and AI products to be done in an open way, right? Like to the extent that we want to create intelligent models, I think that can be done more effectively through open source. We see that today. We see a lot of open source contributions even in the current environment. And for, like, do we want AI to be created by, a few hundred or a few thousand engineers in just 3, 4, or 5 big tech companies that are all located on the West Coast of the United States? Or do we want the world to be working on AI? And then to the extent that AI is dangerous, do we want a few open AI engineers working on the safety problem? Or do we want like tens of thousands of engineers globally working on the safety problem? And to the extent that that problem cannot be solved that well, I actually think counterintuitively the answer is to have AI be even more open so the dangers of AI models can counterbalance themselves. So, to me, like, openness is the thing.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think this move towards distributed training for different types of models, and not just large ones and also small ones. You have companies that are specializing in that, as you said, on kind of commodity hardware, then opens up the possibility for building these open systems, or maybe it goes hand in hand, that in turn generates the trust that that Jamie is talking about, and people are more prepared to give up their data. There is an argument that if you then do that, you move, the compute becomes a more kind of distributed compute environment. You can tap into different data sources, and those data sources are they going to give better trained models and better results. And Jamie, on your point, like, the open web has given us maybe as much as it can, but to put a number on it, it's like orders of magnitude more data is actually held within social networks, for example, let alone the data that people might be encouraged to share if they have a reason to, or they trust the systems better. So maybe, I don't mean to skip you, but I know Hugo have some views here. In that future, do you think that we're going to be able to get the right data to the right place at the right time and get a better outcome?
I mean, I think it's a very worthy ambition to do decentralized training of these very large models. You've got a lot of barriers to getting there. Privacy. If you're sharing data, who are you sharing it with? How are they processing it? How are they processing it whilst they don't know what the actual data is? Because that would be the more desirable outcome. It's going to cost at some point, certainly now, it's not feasible to do decentralized training as cheaply as with a data center. So to build this entire infrastructure out, take a lot of time and a lot of money just to get to through the research and build to be able to enable decentralized training. At which point, where is OpenAI at that point? It's taken us 7, 8 years to get like basic ZK working quite well. There's a lot more components that probably need to go into this kind of stuff. So
Hugo, we like hard stuff, though, don't we? Like, we want to be on the frontier.
Well, there's no point being on the frontier if someone's going to beat you to the punch, and you're never going to be able to get to really ship it because the money runs out.
No, it's a good point. So I guess the question is, is it not just about achieving it, but doing something that is not possible for for folks doing the closed approach to achieve, accessing?
Well, you may be able to get a different way of managing governance. So that you're not going to be able to get the same kind of governance with a centralized player as you could with a decentralized network. But whether that results in a better product in the long run is as yet still an open question.
So actually, it probably relates to kind of the validating humans a little bit. it is probably conventional wisdom that in venture capital, that making bets on projects that rely on privacy as their core value proposition has not always been a great one to make, but basically because of human nature, which people care about privacy except only when it's too late, so therefore they don't buy stuff. But at the same time, we've started to see individuals and businesses, when they're looking at the prospects of giving up their very personal, very, very personal, or proprietary information to OpenAI, to hesitate, to hold on a second. And the latest version, I had an upgrade, and it's now got a memory of my different interactions, and it's using it to compound its personalization for me. And you're like, do I want to do that? So perhaps that is a core part of the proposition for an open approach, if people can be brought to trust trustlessness. We did that to ourselves. Then maybe that would work. Terence, what do you think?
I think, when, I come from sort of a consumer tech web background, where I think ultimately when we sort of look at users of any sort of product, or even when we're not talking about developers using AI, but actually end consumers who are using services, I'm not sure they actually care that much, whether it is centralized, whether it's decentralized. I think with much of blockchain technology right now, there's a lot of infrastructure being built, but there's not enough of a focus on building applications where people actually want to use or find it easy to use, right? So even when it comes to, I think, artificial intelligence, I think, Richard, you mentioned, do people care about the privacy? People care about all their data being used again for training, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not actually sure people really care that much. Most of us have an Instagram account, a Facebook account. You're still using ChatGPT because it's probably better than the other models out there. So I think, and that's for people like us. Whereas if you look at the general retail user or consumer, I don't think they care.
They care even less.
They definitely care even less, right? And I think for what we're trying to do, what we're trying to build is sort of self-sovereign identity, so that whatever data they're providing, they can revoke at any point in time. They can control it. So it sort of plays to your point about, potentially people would care, but ultimately for us, it's still focusing on creating an easy user experience.
Right. So GPU maybe will achieve it, or the GPU level economics. On the data side, we better not rely on privacy, so it better be better data. What about in terms of models like creations, intellectual property, which includes the models and agents themselves? Do we see a role for Web3 in that space? And I think we can agree we're looking for a role that is triggered by a fundamental value proposition, not a kind of philosophical desire to keep things decentralized.
Well, I think to your point, people just care about a superior product. And so this has been the disadvantage of Web3. I actually think even calling it Web3 on reflection is a bit of a misnomer, because what we've done is we've, in principle, upgraded the functionality of the internet, but it has no UX. It's unusable for most developers. It's unusable for most end users, unless there's some compromise on its Web3-ness, which kind of defeats the purpose. And actually, what's really interesting is, in this decade that we built this internet infrastructure, in parallel, there's been advances in natural language and LLMs. And I think when you combine that with agentic networks, and you imagine that the direct user of Web3 infrastructure isn't a person, it's an agent. All the on-chain stuff is done by agents. The user interface, like much of the web, will become conversational, natural language. Then actually all the complexity of Web3 is removed, and its benefits can be revealed. And so kind of coming back to that context point, I believe that if you imagine a world where you don't need search engines anymore, most people already replaced most search with ChatGPT. You don't need, as agents roll out, you don't need an app for everything. You don't need to be going into an app manually. You don't even need a website for everything. You don't need price comparison websites. You don't need interruptive advertising. You just need an agent to work with other agents to solve problems optimally. And the user interface just needs to be as minimalistic as possible. And so really, for that to happen, the user needs to provide as much context about themselves, their needs, the environment that they want to interface with as possible. And so, to do that, to be able to do that effectively, to have portability of context, controlling and permissioning of context, you need Web3. So I think the way you get the most superior experience from AI will be from leveraging this kind of latent capability of Web3 infrastructure.
That makes a lot of sense. So Sarah Tavel over at Benchmark tweeted the other day that we're entering a new phase of kind of there's an app for that, and it's going to be there's an agent for that. And I actually did count. I've known Sarah for a while, but I counted on Twitter, X, whatever, that I don't think it's there's an agent for that. It's that there is the user decides to go and seek it. There's an AI service that identifies that there's a participant who might benefit from that service proactively and comes to the participant effectively. And that might be a participant that can contribute something supply side or will consume some of the service, kind of both. And so exactly to your point then, how you interact with that is going to look quite different from an app. In fact, there is no app.
There is no app, yeah. I mean, it flips from an attention economy to an intention economy. So I think the next evolution of Web3 infrastructure is intent-based architecture. So I have an intent, and then the world organizes around me to solve that problem. My UI will just be my preferred AI interface, my preferred LLM, but the problem is solved by a collective of agents.
So if we take that further, because sometimes it's useful to imagine what this sort of endpoint looks like a little bit to come back to these sort of technical questions. What's it going to look like on our phone? So if there's no apps, presumably there's no app store. And
death of search, death of the app store, death of internet for advertising.
And then we're sort of talking or thinking at our phones.
Guys, we still have landlines.
You still have a landline.
I actually don't have a landline.
You still have what? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, technology does take time to turn over. I don't think there won't be any apps, a couple of years from now. I think we'll be using apps for a long time. But it's a really interesting question because even today, right, there are a number of teams who are building products that look like this. You have a chatbot which allows you to translate your natural language into, as Jamie says, intents for trading in crypto markets, right? So you could say something like, I want to trade Ethereum for Solana, and I want such and such an exchange rate, and I want to bridge the result of that transaction to some other chain, and so on. And then the LLM will translate that into blockchain transactions and execute that for you. But what's interesting is, is that really the consumer or retail interface for doing that? Who is actually the customer of that? And I'm actually quite skeptical that even though it's easier, that normal people want to interact in that way. So I think there's still a huge use case for, just having a panel in your phone and trading the old way.
I mean, history would tell us that normally it's not like everything gets replaced either quickly or totally. So I would, tend to agree for what it's worth. But in trying to envision sort of where it's going, maybe we can have that mixed vision in mind and think about the next question, which is how are agents going to bank themselves? How are agents going to pay for things in a way that we're going to feel comfortable about or that will technically work? Who wants to pipe up on that topic?
I'm happy to.
Well,
but
someone on Twitter said, well, they can just use Stripe. But there's a lot of crypto people, or there's a lot of reasons why using crypto would be a lot cooler, faster, cheaper, more efficient.
And I actually think, when you ask the payments and sort of the banking question, ultimately these agents have to be controlled by people, right?
Do they?
I have a hard time believing that, I say I want to buy a car, and then I have money in an account, and then I just let the agent decide what's the best car for me. Maybe smaller transactions, maybe smaller things potentially, but I actually think people still want some sort of control, and that's why I do think advertising will actually continue to exist. In fact, one of the things that we're focusing on with Humanity Protocol is making sure that you're advertising to people instead of AI agents, because ultimately it should be people who are making these decisions.
Yeah, so let's take a concrete example in the last 1 minute, 20 seconds. So you may not want to buy the car or allow your agent to buy the car on your behalf, especially if it's interacting with second-hand car salesmen. But maybe it's allowed to make a reservation or make an inquiry or book a viewing on your behalf in the run-up to that final purchase, and certainly to do a whole, once you've set your intent, go and look at the type of car you want and keep track of that over time. So, and in that context, I think we can see, can't we, sort of small payments being required, not just to say secure a booking, but but also to be allowed to use the underlying infrastructure, including other agents themselves. So that's fair. So they might have to, so they won't buy the car, but they're still going to have to do some kind of payment, but maybe not through a Stripe API. Why not through a Stripe API? Can we be concrete?
I mean, I just personally think that people want to use newer technologies even if it doesn't quite make sense, right? Like in 1995, if you told someone hey, we should order some pizza by using a computer, they thought that was really silly. But now we only order pizza through computers. It's a social movement in a way, and it will be the same with agents. They will use crypto because it's the cool modern thing to do, and eventually, at scale, it will become the more efficient thing to do.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to have to struggle to get out of current practices. But I do think ultimately, if you believe there's sort of possibly no phone, but certainly no app store, maybe no apps, and we're getting rid of some of those centralized intermediaries, because perhaps we believe that an intermeshed set of networks that are trustless is something that we do trust more, that at that point in time, you're not going to then want to impose Stripe as a trusted intermediary on the payments framework for the agents. It's just not going to be compatible with this new approach to doing things. Right. And if we're trying to mesh the two, we're going to struggle to get the full value out of the whole thing. So that means it's more exciting, but tougher to get there, as you said.
I think the difference is between optimal outcomes and convenient outcomes. So people seek convenient outcomes, which is why we like using the same app or the same website or the same brand. It's consistency. Agents like optimal outcomes, and they don't mind complexity. They can navigate complexity logically. Humans are illogical. So if you look at the consumer internet and the things that we do on it, and you kind of apply Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there are some things that we love doing, like buying a car. Usually, for most people, is quite exciting. They like looking at different ones and looking at the performance and stuff. But why do I need the Uber app? What function does it provide? I just need a taxi. Hey, you're running late. Do you want an Uber? Yeah, book it for me. It knows that I like premium or whatever the parameters. And there are so many examples on the consumer internet where you just don't need to do it. It's not pleasant, it's not pleasurable, and most often than not, you might not even be getting the optimal outcome. And so I think if you're looking at what gets disrupted, versus what stays and gets more immersive, it's kind of on that spectrum. Some things I want to do in a highly minimalist way, some things I want to do in an immersive way. Anything that's minimalist will be unbundled by agents.
So it's going to make keeping your calendar up to date even more important, so you don't inadvertently walk out of the conference and automatically find yourself in an Uber to the airport when actually you've moved your flight, for example, or something even more confusing or embarrassing, who knows. I think on that note, I must bring the conversation to a close. Any final thoughts?
Happy to. I mean, I think it's an unbelievably interesting area to apply to blockchain. We didn't really get through that much of like what can the use cases be, what can blockchain do for AI, rather than what AI can do for blockchain. But it's, I think it can be very interesting.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.